Hi everyone, I'm Helen Joyce, the Director of Advocacy at Sex Matters.
And I'm Maya Forstater, the CEO at Sex Matters.
And we're going to talk this week about girl guiding, which has been, as we say, on a journey. Maya, what's happened?
So, girl guiding, I think if we go back to the beginning, girl guiding since about 2016 and then as an official policy since 2018 has been allowing boys who identify as girls to join as girl guides and brownies and men who identify as women to join as guide leaders, which is supposedly a female only position. And obviously Girl Guides is a organization that was set up for women and girls. This week, they have finally said that any boys identifying as girls who are members of guides will have to leave by September this year. So, kind of the new school term, really. And this comes after, I think it was December last year, was when they first said they'd, they'd come round to understanding the Supreme Court's judgment, which obviously was not about children at all. It was about people with gender recognition certificates, but that was what precipitated them finally uh, reassessing their policy and realizing that they couldn't lawfully allow men who identify as women, boys who identify as girls, to be in a female only organisation. And
I mean,
obviously,
it's
there's a
extraordinary,
lot that
really.
happened in between. Oh, sorry. Obviously, there's a lot that happened in between 2018 and now.
It's extraordinary that if we go back 10 years, even though that was when the gender madness was really kicking off, that somewhere like Girl Guiding would fall for it. Because, I mean, for example, it's a charity that's got a royal charter and is limited by its charitable objects to serving solely female people. How do they get around that?
And and not only the charitable objects, safeguarding. All of this talk about legal sex and gender recognition certificates, it's so obvious that this is an organisation that's dealing with young girls, often taking them away for their first trip away from their parents, sleeping in tents, dealing with accidents, just things that are very clearly about children and bodies, and just basic common sense and safeguarding should have told them that it does not make sense. It's not safe to allow uh, a boy to identify as a girl in that situation or a man to identify as a woman. I think they took bad legal advice. So when they were first challenged by some guide leaders in 2018, Julie Bentley, who was then the CEO, said, "We have no choice. We cannot use the Equality Act, or we're not within the Equality Act to exclude um, trans girls from guides." And that obviously was bad advice then. It's clearly bad advice now. But that's what they hid behind. And then also the Equality and Human Rights Commission publicly said, because they were challenged about this and asked questions, and they said, "Girl Guide, we haven't taken an issue with Girl Guides. We haven't said that they're not a single sex organisation because they're allowing in boys." So they had both their own legal advice and the regulator saying this is the law, and they didn't push hard enough to understand that it wasn't. I don't think it's an excuse. We looked at that advice too. Not the internal legal advice they got, but what the HRC was saying in public, and we could see that it was nonsense. But they took that as the
Yeah.
law.
I mean, I guess that it was like everybody everywhere, it was bubbling up. I mean, I don't think much of this was at that point driven top down in each individual organisation. I think that the push for gender self ID was across society very top down, but I think it then got taken up by individuals, and often maybe an individual who had a trans child or had a friend with a trans child. And then, it seems kind. And I think a lot of people don't think deeply about what the problem is with admitting a pretty little 5 or 6 or 7 year old boy who calls himself a girl, who honestly you'd think he was a girl if that's who you met, and he's obviously a little sweetie, and who are you to turn him away? And the girls are probably saying, oh yes, he can pee next to me, or whatever the child version of that is, and they don't think puberty is coming down the road, and this is going to be a teenage boy and a man, and every day we wait, it'll be harder.
Absolutely, and also I think um, federated organisations have limited power from the centre to tell, particularly, I mean, Guides is a voluntary organisation. It runs on the goodwill of local guide leaders, and it's quite hard for people in the centre to tell people who are running guide nights, 7 days a week, what to do. And so, like you say, I think there was practice that was already going on within individual guide units, and they felt like they couldn't say no. And I think that, I mean, that's happened all over the place. It's happened in the Women's Aid Federation, happened in the Church of England. I mean, one of the problems that the Church of England has had was that some vicars were already marrying people. The church said we won't marry same-sex couples. That was their position. But there were already vicars who were marrying people who were same-sex couples where one person had transitioned. So that, there's a sense where the people in the centre are kind of responding to what's happening, and they don't want to be mean or whatever. But safeguarding means you have to be mean. You have to be clear.
It's interesting because they are mean. They're very, very mean a lot of the time. They're mean whenever you say any of this sort of thing.
Mm.
And we know it has never been the majority position. Like, if this was just the way society was going and you and I were dinosaurs on this, that'd be one thing. I mean, we could go to our graves still shouting, "You're harming children." And they would be harming children, but that was the way society was going. We want to harm children now these days, apparently. But that's just not true. I mean, we know Girl Guide leaders. We both know Katie Alcock
Mm.
and Helen Watts, and both of them spoke up. They spoke up in private, then when that failed, they spoke up in public, and they were treated absolutely appallingly. I mean, I saw Katie tweeting in the last couple of days, and I mean, how she didn't just put caps lock on and shout, "I told you
Yeah.
so." But she certainly feels vindicated. I had a chat with her yesterday, and she said, yes, she's feeling extremely smug in the nicest possible way. Anyway, what happened to the two of them? Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, she said it was back in 2016 when she first started hearing
That's
um,
right.
sort of rumors, like you say, there was no policy, but she was hearing rumors about girls, trans girls in girl guides, and she was a guide leader and also a mum of a young daughter who was going to be going up into rainbows. Um, and so she started uh, with Helen Watts. They started a little closed Facebook group. I think there were obviously, it wasn't just the two of them. There are others whose names we don't know who were also concerned, and we've talked to other guide leaders over the years who've been concerned. But they had this little group, and quite quickly after it started, somebody in that group screenshotted them saying something about it not being a single gender group. So, nothing offensive, not outing an individual child, not, none of that, just saying something's wrong here. And very quickly it got escalated up to guide headquarters, which is interesting in itself. I mean, it's taken, since the Supreme Court judgment, it took till December for guides to say they changed their policy, and now in practice they're not changing it until next September. But as soon as Katie and Helen started to raise an issue privately, it was escalated headquarters straight away. They were put under investigation. She describes it as a Maoist interrogation, which I'm sure it was. I've been through it. So many people have been through it. The way that organisations overreact and just come down like a ton of bricks on anyone who's questioning the safety of what they're doing. And then so I think Helen Watts came out first. She was in the papers. She talked about it, but then it was Katie Alcock who decided to bring a case, and she initially asked for, I think she asked for £1 in damages because there wasn't monetary harm to her. So she wasn't doing it for the money. So she asked for them to change the policy to make sure that her daughter could be allowed into rainbows and she could be allowed as a helper, which she hadn't been, and to pay £1 in damages. but they ended up, uh, guides ended up spending, I think, six figures of the charity's money defending this thing, and then they settled with her. And obviously, she had to settle at that point because they'd racked up all these costs, and she'd only asked for £1. And so, if she hadn't, she was at risk of paying their costs. So they paid her costs, they paid their own costs out of the charity's money, defending this thing which wasn't lawful. They said that she could come back into rainbows and guides, and that they would make sure that people with gender critical views were included. But by that time, her relationship with guides had so soured that she took her daughter to Scouts.
And
Um,
anyway, I mean, she wasn't, her base point wasn't you're excluding people with gender critical views. Her base
no,
point was you're letting boys into places where they can't be for anybody's safety, their own, but mostly the girls.
but I think at that point, I mean, I think the case that she brought was belief discrimination. She had Peter's
No, no,
name.
sure, but that's a
Yeah,
separate thing. The point I'm trying to
absolutely.
make is that why would she want to send her daughter there if they're still letting boys in potentially?
Yeah, quite. And but the other thing is, I think a lot of um, guide leaders and parents, if the problem isn't in their unit, then
Yes.
they will keep, because there's so much great stuff about guides, and why would you want to deprive your daughter of that for the principal if the problem isn't in your unit? And I think, we've spoken to guide leaders who've just worked around this. They know there's a policy from on high, um, but they're going to run their guide unit as they always have. And so, a lot of people, obviously, they keep their head down. They want to have good relations with the guide leaders in their district and their unit. I had a fight with scouts over this. I was a scout leader, and I ended up being investigated by Scouts HQ because somebody reported me for misgendering on the internet, and it soured my relationship with my local scout leaders because it wasn't their problem. And I ended up leaving, and that was because of the way that Scouts HQ had treated me.
I mean, we must finish that story, which is that you were ultimately vindicated years later.
Yes, and they apologized for it. But like Katie Alcock, I didn't go back.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that that's one of the sources of asymmetry in all of this. If you are a mother who has transitioned your child or a parent who's transitioned your child, you're all in, as I've commented before. But specifically, you know, to get an organization to go along with you, you either do or you don't. And if you do, your child is in now, but other people who aren't anywhere near your child, like somewhere else in the country, and that's going to be most people. We've always been talking about a small number of boys coming to guides. Those people don't have anything beyond the principle to fight on. And, you and I are among the rare people who are mad enough to want to fight on principle. Most people just want to do their jobs,
Mm.
have a happy home life, not go bust, put bread on the table, and stay friends with people that they're friends with. So, that's the asymmetry. You've got one person who's all in, and then very large numbers of people who are keeping their head down and saying, if it comes my way, I'll do something about it.
Yeah, and then you have people who see the problem but think that they can work around it. They have um, somebody who applies to be a guide leader who is clearly a man who identifies as a woman, and they find a way of saying, you know, our waiting list is full, or whatever, because they can't see a way of staying within the guide's policies and keeping their safeguarding, keeping the children safe and being honest to the parents and the children and keeping the show on the road. So they find a workaround. And I think that that's happened a lot, and then that's how you end up breaking safeguarding systems, because people
Yeah, I
are
was going to
doing
say,
things and not writing them down, and not telling each other, or they're telling each other in sort of offline ways because they can't put it on the risk assessment. They can't say it at the meeting when they're planning the camping away trip. They have to find a way of telling each other the risks um, secretly, and that breaks
and
down.
then there's always the fear that one of the people they're talking to is a true believer.
Mm,
I mean, I think let's stop and talk about the safeguarding issues for a while, because I mean, I've been looking at what people have been saying online, and some of them have been pointing out, for example, that men can be helpers for guides.
Mhm.
And, you know, I can't be answering every rando on X, but what I want to say to those people is that's fine. We're recognizing that they're men. The problem here is that it's a man we're not recognizing as a man. The
Mm.
issue is the man you have to treat as a woman. And then, you know, you've got to the state that you can't write down rules that are actually coherent and you can't enforce them, and that's where loopholes come in.
And also, you can't say why it is that some men want to identify as women. You know,
Yeah.
not all men, not all transvestites, but some, well, are doing it for a sexual fetish. As you know, so it's not just this is a man that we're calling a woman, it's this is a man with a sexual fetish who is seeking access to an organization for women and girls who has a sexual fetish that we can't talk about and that we have to um, affirm and celebrate.
And you can't say what you're looking at. I mean, you and I have both seen pictures that have been published in public places, this is not in secret groups, of men who have been girl guiding leaders. One of them dressed in, you know, short little leather gear, fishnet tights, heels with a riding crop,
Mm.
and the other one doing a sort of a burlesque dance that's meant to look like, what's her name, Dita something.
Yeah, sitting in a big champagne glass, um,
Yeah,
Dita
and I mean, these
Montini.
are, you know, these are things that men can do if they want among consenting adults. They're not things that should be motivating a man to join a women or a girl only organisation. And if you were doing safeguarding properly, you would be noting these things and you would be saying this is not a suitable person, as a man even, to work with girls.
Yes, I mean it's one of the big things of safeguarding is being able to ask people when you're interviewing them, when you're considering somebody for a role in an organization, what are your motivations for working with children? And you can't have areas that you can't speak about. That, you know, that's how you get unsuitable people working with children. This is a man who wants to be treated as a woman who has put his hobbies or sexual interests out there in the public on social media, um, and you can't talk about any of that because you're supposed to treat this man as a woman.
Yeah, and what they will say to you, I mean, I've seen this in the prison guidance as well, is they'll say, "Oh, but a woman who did that wouldn't be a problem."
Mm,
Like, you know, you're being discriminatory towards trans women because if a cis woman did this, you wouldn't see a problem. To which the only answer is yes, but this isn't a woman.
yeah,
I mean, what
yeah.
else is there to say? And then they will say, well, trans women are women, and you've reached an impasse.
Mm.
Why did this come about in an organisation for children in the sense that children could never have had GRCs? We've talked internally a lot about how the GRC is the kind of, you know, the unexploded landmine when organisations are thinking about access to single sex spaces, because you're always wondering, has this person got a GRC? Well, they might, so I've got to treat every trans person as if they did because I'm afraid of the whole privacy rules about GRCs. But under 18s can't have GRCs. It would be very easy. Their birth certs in this country are reliable, so
Mm.
you can exclude all boys. It's not a problem.
I mean, I think there's obviously the linkage between what was going on in schools at the time and what
Right.
was going on in guides. And one of the things that came out when Katie Alcott got disclosure, I think, from Girl Guides, was that part of their kind of risk assessment of all of this was that they thought that everyone in a girl guiding unit would know everyone else from school. So they were sort of taking a cohort of girls from school, you know, from people who are paid to do this and who are much more regulated than guides. And they're saying this is a group of girls. Why would Girl Guides then exclude one of them? And obviously, individual guide units do take girls from all kinds of different schools, and then you know they go off on camp with other units, so it's not that sort of cozy single cohort anyway. But I think um, they looked at the sort of classification of children that was coming from schools in the same way that adults think about GRCs. You know, someone else in the system has decided that this child is a girl, therefore who are we to question that? And I think another thing is that if these children were on a medical pathway or wanting to be on a medical pathway, and the adults in guides knew, I mean, perhaps didn't know very much about that, but they imagined that these children were going to in some way change sex. And once you consider what that involves, having their genitals removed, having their fertility impaired, having their adult sexual function destroyed, once you think about anything like that, it's either a terrible human rights abuse or it's a essential medical treatment of which the including that child in guides is part of the necessary steps to it. And I think, everyone says, well, trust the experts, guide leaders, just volunteers, volunteering for a couple of hours a week. Who are they to question what the NHS is doing, what the schools are doing, what the government is doing, what the Equality and Human Rights Commission is endorsing?
Yeah, and it just shows you what social transition means. Whenever we talk about social transition to people, like they always think names, clothes, hairstyle, and pronouns.
Mm,
They think it's that, and then they think like, why is anyone worrying about that? Because none of that is permanent. All of it is reversible, and it's all personal to you. But they don't realize that what you're doing is you're changing a classification, and that classification jumps up in all sorts of places that you don't think about and imposes on other people, for example, as you say, like the guiding volunteers.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's also showing how hard it is to row it all back because there's a coordination issue. I really, really do feel for the boys this has been done to.
Mm,
I've had a few people online say, why are you being so sympathetic to the boys when you're not sympathetic to the girls? A, I'm extremely sympathetic to the girls. But B, there's something that really tugs at the heartstrings when I think of potentially little boys or even teenagers who have been misled by the adults around them into A, taking this very dangerous medical pathway in some instances, but also B, being told that this is their human right, that if this isn't done for them, the alternative may be self-harm or worse, and that anyone who doesn't agree hates them, wants them
mm.
dead, and so on. And the idea that now to have to say to those kids, sorry, everything we said to you was wrong, I really feel sick at it.
Yeah, yeah. And then to put that burden on a group of volunteers, and these children have been told that, like you say, if people disagree with their uh, identity, that they mean harm to them. They're an incredibly vulnerable group of children, and so I can see why Guides has picked September as the date for this. It's the new term. Um, it aligns with what's going on in schools with the Keeping Children Safe in Education new statutory safeguarding guidance, which um, says that children can't be allowed to use opposite sex facilities, can't be allowed to play opposite sex sports, can't be recorded as the opposite sex. It still leaves a couple of things on the table in terms of probably pronouns and uniform, although it doesn't spell that out. And that's going to come in September. So I think that kind of coordination problem between schools and voluntary organisations, they've picked September as the date, and also it gives them time to communicate it and get their heads around it. But obviously also there's time for backlash, quite an organised backlash against this.
Oh yeah, let's talk about that. We've got Guiders Against Trans Exclusion, which neatly makes the word gate, and their campaign is Unlocking the Gate.
Mm.
So, I mean, there seems to be a group of guiders who are willing to die on the hill of letting boys into girls' spaces.
Yeah, I mean, straight after when Guides announced the policy change in December, they created this Facebook group. And it's interesting, as far as we know, they haven't been investigated with the speed or alacrity that Helen Watts and Katie Alcock were. They've been allowed to organise, they've been allowed to publish this guidance or handbook for guide leaders who want to protest against what the policy decision that Guiding has made, and they're doing that in guide units. So it's not even that they're just talking about it on Facebook. They're leading activities within guides and brownie units, discussions, colouring, badges, telling them that being inclusive means including trans girls in guides, and protesting against the policy decision, which is the only lawful policy decision guides could have taken as guide leaders. And as far as we know, they've not been removed. Some of them have resigned in protest, but they've not been removed. And Guides has now set up this working group to think about how they include trans girls and trans women in guiding. So it's quite a different picture from 2018 when Guides had the trans inclusive policy and there were a few guide leaders speaking up.
It's interesting. It's a similar approach to what Women's Institute is doing. It also has said that it can no longer admit trans women, aka men, and it has taken the same, with much sorrow and regret, our hands are forced type approach. And it too is looking at ways to have, I think they're calling them solidarity groups. But this brings us to what it is to be a charity. I mean, we're a charity, and I know as CEO, you spend a great deal of your time thinking, is this within our charitable objects? There are things we might want to do, but they're not within our charitable objects. So we would be cheating our donors if we did them, and we would be cheating the taxman if we did them too, because we get tax breaks to do the things that we do. I simply do not understand how the Charity Commission did not
Mm,
talk about this earlier. It was never the
mm.
case that boys who identify as girls were legally girls. We know that. Why did they not say something?
And they're still not. And we know that at the same time, when Helen and Katie were complaining as guide leaders, there were also people on the board of trustees saying, we're concerned, this is a problem. But I guess they got voted down, or they decided to leave rather than stay and fight. But it's the responsibility of the board of trustees. It's their responsibility to make sure that the charity follows its objects. And as you say, these Girl Guides objects are a royal charter. Uh, and I think because the EHRC said it was okay, the Charity Commission said it was okay. But it's now very, very clear that it's not okay. And what the Charity Commission is saying to single sex charities is, you take your own legal advice, which is crazy, because there's no need to have an army of lawyers all over the country saying the same thing to every single charity. What they need now is for the Charity Commission to say, sorry, we should have been on top of this long ago. If your charity is for women and girls or men and boys, that's who you should have as your beneficiary group, and that means female people or male people. And they still haven't said that. They're still saying, we're waiting for the guidance, which is really unforgivable.
And I think they're also, I don't want to put thoughts into the Charity Commission's head, but generally what I'm seeing is that there's this obfuscation between, people of the opposite sex that were accepting are of the opposite sex, and people were pretending have changed sex. So you can be a charity for women and girls and still actually spend a bit of money on men and boys. For example, you might want to have events for girl guides and their dads, and that might there might be a bit of money on that, or parents generally, some of whom are going to be male. But that is different from treating a boy or a man as a girl or a woman. And that's where you might need, I suppose, occasionally legal advice. Like if you decided, just spitballing here, you're a charity for girls and you really think the big issue is that you need to do something with their whole families, are you doing too much of that? You might then get legal advice on, is this acceptable? But I mean, that's really specialist and niche. And it doesn't break safeguarding because you're treating everybody as their sex. And it's not the simple question of if it says boys or girls anywhere in your charitable objects, and I would also say in any policy you have, if it says boy, girl, man, woman, male, female, those words take their natural
Mm.
meaning, and they must.
Yeah, and I mean the other situation that arises is when charities are doing contracts or getting grants from the
Right.
government or from local government or from the Ministry of Justice or whoever, and they require them to provide a service for men and for women, even though their core beneficiary group is women. And sometimes organisations will do some things commercially which are mixed sex, but the profits from their commercial activities are supporting their core beneficiary group, which is still women or girls. Um, I mean, none of this should be as complicated as it has been made to be. And then there are groups of charity leaders, third sector against transphobia, uh, writing to the Charity Commission, setting up petitions, saying, we stand against this terrible Supreme Court judgment, writing things in the charity press. There's a whole movement within charities who've bought into this stuff for the past 15 years. Not only the likes of Stonewall and Gendered Intelligence, for whom this is their core business, but all kinds of charities that have bought into this, and the Charity Commission really isn't providing the leadership to enable those charities to get back to their core mission.
I mean, it's interesting because we're talking about a charity that's for children. I mean, one of the things that children need is clarity, boundaries, and to hear the word no said kindly and appropriately. And it's just no good to negotiate with children. You can't negotiate over
Mm,
bedtime or, a healthy diet or whether it's acceptable to whack your brother or whatever. So if the Charity Commission, I really think if it had just done that parental technique of saying, I hear what you're saying, but,
mm,
and just kept repeating from the very beginning, there is no doubt about which children are boys or girls. This is a charity for girls, therefore it must be only for girls. I hear what you're saying, but it
yes.
wouldn't have even got to this.
Yeah. And Girl Guides and Scouts in particular are very rules-based organisations. I mean, you don't join Girl Guides if you don't like the uniform and like um, the set of rules that go with it. It wouldn't have been that hard for them to say from the top, no, we're a girls' organisation. But once the confusion had set in, it needed the Charity Commission.
I mean, that's why we have regulators. People are paid big bucks to do these jobs and they haven't been doing them. And it's them I blame. Like for these, there are right now, there are kids who are very upset and, boys who are, very confused because now grown-ups are telling them the opposite of what they told them before. And of course, there are girls who've been whipped up into thinking that this is the
Mm,
kindest, most important issue, that, trans girls are not only girls, they're the most important and most vulnerable girls. And all those kids have been massively let down, especially by the regulators and the government, in my opinion. And we're going to finish in a minute, but I want to talk a bit about Scouts before we go, because one of the things that people bring up online a lot is, it's the whataboutery of, well, Scouts isn't for boys anymore, it's mixed sex. So what's the problem with girl guiding being mixed sex? And when we've covered the it's different to be mixed sex and know what sex every child is, to being pretending you're single sex and still admitting kids of the opposite sex. But tell us why Scouts is mixed sex now anyway.
so Scouts was originally a boys only organisation. In fact, that's why Guides was started. But they took a decision, I can't remember the year, I think it was in the 80s, to become co-ed, and it was a major thing. They had to consult, every district. There were views on either side. There were groups of Scouts that broke away and that still exist. So there's a separate group of kind of more traditional Scouts that still exists. But they decided democratically as an organisation to change their charitable objects, and then obviously they had to go to the Charity Commission and ask for permission to do that and to change their royal charter. So now they allow girls in to Scouts and Cubs, and um, partly they did that because funding. I mean, there was just the demand for it, and they decided that that was the best thing to do as their organisation. They could have decided something different, but they didn't. And I mean, Scouts, as I said, I had a whole argument with Scouts about this around the same time as Katie and Helen were having an argument with Guides. They also have a problem because they have the same policy of pretending that children have changed sex. And although they are a co-ed organisation, when you go away on camp, you still, or in any situation, you still have to remember which children are boys and which children are girls, and think about which facilities they're using, which tents they're sleeping in, and so on. So Scouts have the same problem, but obviously fixing it is easier because you're not having to exclude any children from Scouts as a whole. You're just having to say, we do remember what sex everyone is, and we know that's important. Uh, but yeah,
Yeah.
they changed as a charity.
Yeah, and I was thinking about like why and why maybe demand fell for boy-only organisations. And one of the obvious ones is that boys have a lot of other boy-only options in
Yeah.
particular sports. So if you're a sporty boy, you can be on boy-only teams, and most sporting clubs will really separate the boys and girls a lot, and the boys bit is the big bit. Girls don't have so many single sex options by any means, and even if they're sporty, the girls' bit of their local, whatever it is, club will be much smaller than the boys' bit, and it'll be less well funded, there'll be less trips away, all that sort of thing. And then, I mean, I don't know to what extent they were thinking about it in the 80s, but there was also the child sex abuse scandal, not just in this country, but in many other places, with the fact that they became a place where predatory men could find boys. And you know, is that attractive for people to send their children off to? Absolutely not.
Mm.
So I don't know what part that played in their thinking.
Yes, I think that was probably also part of the kind of culture shift of Scouts.
Well, I think we'll be writing to both Girlguiding and indeed to Scouts, Maya, and asking for a meeting. Check that both of them really actually are following through on this clear culture shift that acknowledges that children and adults cannot change sex. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.